The Graveyard deck is one of the most underrated archetypes in EDH today. Decks that use the Graveyard are very powerful for three main reasons. First, Graveyard decks have the potential to offer insane amounts of card advantage by reusing cards over and over again. Second, these decks tend to lack a strong battlefield presence and are subtle compared to decks that summon hordes of dragons or vast armies of tokens, which makes it quite easy to stay under the radar. And third, Graveyard hate is not a common thing that most commander decks run. Right now, the only wildly popular commander staples that function as Graveyard hate are Farewell and Bojuka Bog. Even still, a good Graveyard deck can bounce back from one or two of these effects in a single game. However, if your Graveyard deck goes unanswered, which is the far more likely scenario, and you have bought enough time to utilize its resources, you are likely to completely overwhelm your opponents. The deck I have for you today is my Golgari Graveyard deck that plans to fill up its graveyard as fast as possible and set up for a single massive game-winning turn. The commander at the helm is Jarad, Golgari Lich Lord. Jarad starts out as a 2/2, but he gets +1/+1 for each creature card in our graveyard, and he can evade command attacks with his Spirit ability, which allows us to sacrifice a swamp and a forest to return him from the graveyard to our hand. However, none of that really matters for this deck. Our game plan hinges on Jarad's second ability, which for one black and 1 green, you may sacrifice a creature to have each opponent lose life equal to that creature's power. Now the plan is as follows. Step 1, mill as many cards as we can into our graveyard. Step 2, stop our opponents from winning the game. Step 3, use the graveyard to gain a ton of mana. And step 4, summon a massive creature so our commander can nuke the table. Or just use our massive graveyard to combo off with a few infinite combos hidden within the deck. Now, notice that Jarad does not in any way help with our deck's game plan through the first 3 steps. We do not want to cast Jarad in the early game. His job is to give us Golgari colors and then chill in the command zone until he's ready to be the final nail in our opponent's coffin. So let's begin with the cards that will help us with the first step of our plan, self-mill. Mirror Triton, Stitcher Supplier, and Circle of the Land Druid are all cheap creatures that mill us for 2, 3, and 4 cards respectively when they enter, and are great chump blockers in the early game. Mire has Death Touch, Stitcher mills us 3 more cards when it dies, and Circle of the Land Druid returns a land from our graveyard to our hand when it dies. Skull Prophet can also tap to mill us for 2 cards in addition to being a mana dork. Cheap mana ramp isn't a priority for this deck, as our plan comes together later in the game. But we are running Elves of Deep Shadow, Deathcap Cultivator, and Sakura Tribe Elder as creature ramp, but mostly serve as decent blockers to increase our graveyard's creature count. Many cards in this deck care about having a lot of creatures in our graveyard, and we are also running Soul Ring, because it's Soul Ring. Now let's get back on topic of more self-milling cards. Cavalier Thorns mills us for 5, and then it usually puts a land into play. Cavalier can also be used to put a card in our graveyard on top of our library. Nyx Weaver and Out of the Tombs mill us on upkeep. Nyx Weaver mills us for 2 every upkeep, and you can pay 3 mana and exile it to return any card from your graveyard to your hand. Whereas Out of the Tombs starts by milling 2 cards and then increases by 2 during each of our upkeeps. Its bottom paragraph is also very interesting and totally not broken, but more on that later in this video. Now, Incarnation Technique mills us for 5 cards and then reanimates a creature. And we can demonstrate this spell, meaning we can copy the spell ourselves to mill 10 cards and reanimate twice, if we give a copy to an opponent who fully doesn't appreciate the power of their graveyard. Now, in terms of raw self-milling power, Hermit Druid is king. By paying 1 green and tapping him, we can reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a basic land, then put every other card revealed this way into our graveyard. Simply build your deck with very few basic lands and watch as Hermit Druid puts 20 or more cards into your graveyard each turn. However, the most reliable and consistent self-mill cards in this deck are the 5 cards with the famously fair mechanic called Dredge. Now when it comes to Dredge, Magic players only have 2 responses. Either they have no idea what it is, or they know what it is and are terrified of it. Usually you can count on both responses in a commander pod, but you can also enjoy the more experienced players trying to frantically convince the newer players of the threat posed by Dredge. What exactly is Dredge? Let's look at Dakmar Salvage's Dredge 2 ability. It reads, if you would draw a card, instead you may put exactly 2 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Otherwise, draw a card. This paragraph seems innocuous because it doesn't directly affect the battlefield and has the downside of skipping a draw. But the Dredge ability can be played from the graveyard for 0 mana, and it's difficult to interact with. We want to put Dredge cards into our graveyard to rapidly make our graveyard even bigger. Oh, and we aren't just limited to Dredge 2. Life from the Loam is a sorcery that returns free lands from our graveyard to our hand and has dredge free. With Life from the Loam, we never have to worry about missing land drops. Golgari Fug has dredge 4 and can return a creature from our graveyard to the top of our library. Stinkweed Imp has dredge 5 and is a great blocker that we are always happy to trade for an attacking creature. And lastly, the King of Dredge, Golgari Grave Troll, who has dredge 6. The Grave Troll also enters with a 1/1 counter for each creature card in our graveyard, and he has the most useless regeneration ability I think that I've ever seen. I've used this exactly once in the 6 years I've played with this deck, and that was only because my opponent also forgot about it and accidentally gave me lethal on him by casting a board wipe. Oops. However, the Grave Troll would still be the best card in the deck even if its text box looked like this. That's how powerful Dredge 6 is. The Grave Troll and the other Dredge cards are usually the best targets for our tutor cards, Entomb and Buried Alive. Buried Alive searches for free creature cards and puts them into our graveyard, while Entomb does the same, but for any single card. Now, the second phase in our plan is to stop our opponents from winning the game before we can finish our plan. Crawl Harpooner can gain a lot of power and fight a flying creature when it enters play. He can also be a good sacrifice target for Jarad's ability. Shriekmaw can destroy a non-black, non-artifact creature when it enters play, and then conveniently goes to our graveyard thanks to its evoke ability. Ravenous Chupacabra does cost more mana, but it can remove any creature, no questions asked. Reclamation Sage and Acidic Slime can both remove troublesome artifacts or enchantments, while Druid of Putrefaction can remove multiple artifacts and enchantments that we don't control. Best of all, since our opponents are choosing the targets, we can deflect some blame. Skyfish Spider can sack a creature to remove any non-land permanent, and can gain its life when needed. Grist the Hunger Tide is a strange card that is a planeswalker while in play, but a creature card everywhere else. Grist can mill us and make a token with his +1, sack a creature to remove a creature or planeswalker with his -2, and likely win us the game with his -5. For board wipes, we're running Toxic Deluge to remove creatures, Gaze of Granite to remove everything, and Calling Ritual, which can generate us a ton of mana and kickstart the final stages of our plan. However, our most annoying cards are the ones that keep us alive for a lot longer than our opponents would like. Constant Miss is an extremely annoying card that prevents all combat damage, but the annoying part is its buyback cost of sacrificing a land. This allows us to replay this fog over and over and over again, especially paired with Life from the Loam. Spore Frog is a cute creature that we can sacrifice to prevent all combat damage. Unlike Constant Mist, Spore Frog goes to the graveyard after it's used, which of course means we can't keep replaying him. We definitely aren't running several cards that can pull creatures out of the graveyard. Certainly not. That wouldn't be very sporting to our opponents. This deck also has a soft immortality glitch we can deploy to survive almost anything. Angel of Suffering prevents any damage we would take and instead requires us to mill twice that many cards into our graveyard. This Angel is very good on its own for this deck, but it really shines when it's played alongside Lich's Mastery. Lich's Mastery is a hexproof enchantment that draws us cards whenever we gain life and prevents us from losing the game. However, whenever we lose life, we have to exile a card from our graveyard, our hand, or battlefield for each life we lost. Eventually, we would have to exile Lich's Mastery and lose the game. That is, unless we had some way to prevent the damage. With both of these cards in play, we are nearly unkillable. The Angel prevents the damage, and Lich's Mastery keeps us from dying to an empty library. The only dangers are lose-life effects like Expropriate that can hurt us, and mass permanent removal like Cyclonic Rift that can remove Lich's Mastery and cause us to lose immediately. However, this combo is still very effective against a good number of decks. Often, this is the case against less sophisticated decks, many of whom would struggle to find an answer. And don't worry about winning, this deck has a few more lethal combos to go over. But now let's go over the cards that will help us with the third stage of this deck's plan. Ramp a lot of mana. Our main ramp cards are World Shaper and Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. Our plan is to get one of these cards to trigger and get back a ton of lands from our graveyard. World Shaper does this when it dies, while Lumra does this when she enters, and she mills 4 cards before bringing back all of our lands. Either method is not difficult to trigger. Ruthless Technomancer allows us to sacrifice one of this deck's many big fatty creatures to gain treasures equal to its power. Speaking of sacrificing big fatties, Disciple of Bolas and Disciple of Freyalise both sacrifice a creature to gain life and draw cards equal to its power. Disciple of Freyalise also doubles as a land when needed, but it can't be resurrected by Lumra or World Shaper. Greater Good is an enchantment that also sacrifices creatures to draw cards equal to their power, and we get to discard free cards each time we use this ability, meaning this works very well with dredge cards. Now, some of this deck's biggest threats include Hogak, the Arisen Necropolis, who is a 0 mana 8/8 trample that we can cast from our graveyard so long as we have 2 untapped creatures in play, and Shieldred the Whispering One, who reanimates a creature on our upkeep and causes our opponents to sacrifice a creature on their upkeeps. One of the strongest creatures in this deck is Colossal Grave Reaver, who, to put it lightly, is completely busted. So every time we mill cards while this dragon is in play, we can take a creature from those cards and just put it into play. Yeah, that's definitely fair. Wizards, what were you thinking? And for some reason, Colossal Grave Reaver decided that we needed help milling cards, so he kindly mills us free cards when he enters or attacks. Basically, he is a must-remove threat, or we will soon have half our deck on the battlefield. Now, if you're focused on the 8 mana cost and thinking that it's a huge problem, don't worry. This is a graveyard deck. We are never, ever going to be paying that mana cost. Now let's take a look at the biggest creatures this deck has to offer. Remember, this deck's primary win condition is Jarad's activated ability, which can cause all of our opponents to lose life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Some of the best targets for this ability are Old Stickfingers and Fiend Artisan, both of which have powers that scale with the number of creature cards in our graveyard, similar to Golgari Grave Troll. Old Stickfingers can mill us X creatures on cast, while Fiend Artisan can sack creatures to 2 to 4 more creatures. However, if these creatures aren't big enough to nuke the table, there is Sewer Nemesis, whose power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in our graveyard. That's right, Sewer Nemesis counts every single card in our yard, not just creatures. Now, if even Sewer Nemesis isn't big enough to get the job done, there's Lord of Extinction. If you can get both Lord of Extinction and Jarad in play at the same time, with at least 3 mana open, I promise your opponents will soon be extinct. That's because Lord of Extinction's power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in all graveyards. Let me repeat that. Lord of Extinction counts every single card in every single graveyard. No one is surviving this nuke, not even the annoying life game player. It is worth noting that all of this power is useless if it remains trapped in our graveyard, so we are running a lot of cards to bring things out of our graveyard, as this is the most critical part of our strategy. For creatures, we have Acolyte of Affliction, who mills us 2 cards and then returns a permanent card to our hand. Eternal Witness can return any card to our hand when he enters, making him our most versatile return card. If Genesis is in our graveyard, we can pay 3 mana at our upkeep to return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. There is also Liliana Heretical Healer, who can easily transform into Liliana Defiant Necromancer. This Planeswalker is a great utility card for this deck. Force our opponents to discard while we get to discard a dredge card? Check. Reanimate a non-legendary creature? Check. An ultimate with game-ending potential? Check. Other return effects include the enchantment Oversold Cemetery, which will return a creature card to our hand at each of our upgates if we have 4 or more creature cards in our graveyard, which we will 90% of the time. Perilous Recycling can return 2 permanent cards if we gift a card to an opponent, and Bygone Marvels can return a whopping 3 permanent cards if we have 8 or more permanent cards in our graveyard, which we will 99% of the time. Treasured Find and Balaged Recovery are sorceries that can return any card, and Balaged Recovery can also be used as a land. However, the 2 best return cards in this deck are Nostalgic Dreams and Tortured Existence. Drawing either of these cards will dramatically increase our chances of winning. So what makes them so good? Let's start with the enchantment. Tortured Existence allows us to pay 1 black mana to swap a creature card in our graveyard for 1 in our hand. With a dredge creature, we can always ensure that we have a creature to discard, meaning we will have access to any creature card in our graveyard whenever we need them. Now, Nostalgic Dreams lets us discard any number of cards to return any number of cards to our hand. This is very powerful and versatile. It can often set up any of our combos or value engines all by itself, because it basically makes our graveyard and our hand one and the same. But why bother returning cards to our hand when we can just put them into play? Reanimate for 1 mana and some life, we can put a creature card from our graveyard into play. Animate Dad does something very similar for 2 mana. Don't worry about the complicated rules text. Just think 2 mana Reanimate. But do you know what's better than 2 mana Reanimate? A 0 mana Reanimate. Dread Return's Flashback Cause allows us to cast it from our graveyard for 0 mana by sacrificing 3 creatures in play. This is not a hard cost to pay in this deck, and we also don't have to worry about it getting milled. Victimize for 3 mana will sacrifice 1 creature to reanimate 2 creatures. Journey to Eternity is an aura that becomes a land called Atzel, Cave of Eternity, after the enchanted creature dies. For 5 mana and tapping a land, you can reanimate a creature from our graveyard. Aeginom's Awakening is also a land on its backside, but its front side is an X spell that reanimates X number of creatures that each have a different converted mana cost. However, the strongest reanimation spells in our deck are those that reanimate our entire graveyard. Living Death is a 5-mana sorcery, and Bringer of the Last Gift is an 8-mana vampire demon that both have roughly the same effect. Let's focus on Living Death, as its effect can be complicated to explain to players. Living Death does 3 things. First, it exiles all creature cards from all graveyards. Second, it forces all players to sacrifice all creatures currently in play. And third, puts all cards exiled this way directly into play. This effectively swaps all creatures in graveyards with those on the battlefield. Obviously, we will likely benefit the most from this symmetrical effect because of our large graveyard and several ETB creatures. These cards also play a key role in one of this deck's combos. The simplest form of this combo is a value loop, where we cast Living Death to bring back Eternal Witness among any other creatures in our graveyard to get additional value. Living Death will resolve and go to the graveyard before Eternal Witness's trigger resolves, meaning we can target Living Death to put it back in our hand. When combined with a sacrifice outlet like Viscera Seer, we can ensure that we constantly keep playing Living Death over and over again to outvalue our opponents or just casually shake off any board wipes. This combo does go infinite if Ruthless Technomancer and a creature with 6 or more power are in our graveyard. We'll cast Living Death, return it to our hand with Eternal Witness, make more than enough treasures to recast it with the Technomancer, and then sack everything to Viscera Seer to do it all again. So now we are back at the beginning of the loop again, except now we have more treasures. We'll use 5 of those treasures to recast Living Death and bring back Eternal Witness, Viscera Seer, Ruthless Technomancer, and the rest of our graveyard. Eternal Witness will trigger, putting Living Death back into our hand, and no Technomancer will trigger, making us even more treasures. We can then sack everything to Viscera Seer as many times as we want and gain more treasure tokens each time. Boom, infinite mana, infinite ETB triggers, and infinite death triggers. The other combo in this deck was one I discovered by accident. It involves Greater Good and Out of the Tombs. Remember earlier in the video when I said we would talk about this card's second ability later? Well, later is now. If we have no cards in our library and then go to draw cards, instead of losing the game, we put that many creature cards from our graveyard into play. With Greater Good, we can use the reanimated creatures to draw more cards, which will reanimate more creatures. The only small downside is that we would have to discard our entire hand. This combo is also very hard for opponents to interact with. Creature removal is particularly worthless because of our constant sacrificing. The only way this combo can be stopped is instant speed enchant removal, targeting Out of the Tombs, with draw triggers on the stack. However, this worst case scenario is survivable, and with enough mana, you can immediately get Out of the Tombs back online through a complex sequence of triggers. Let me know in the comments if you can figure it out. Hint, Golgari Thug is the key. Now, my favorite loop is Ruthless Technomancer combined with Ravenous Chupacabra to make infinite mana and destroy all other creatures. Simply sack the Chupacabra to the Technomancer, and then the Technomancer to Greater Good to reanimate them both, using Out of the Tomb's replacement effect. You can also swap Chupacabra for Acidic Slime if you really want to get kicked out of your playgroup. These combos are nice backup plans, but the main win condition is still to nuke the table with Jarad, as it is the easiest to set up and is often seen as more socially acceptable than an infinite combo. Now, you might have noticed that this deck does not have a single game changer. Despite that, I believe this deck is a high bracket free and is capable of punching up to a bracket 4 table. Now let's review the lands for this deck. Verdant Catacombs, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse are our fetch lands that go great with Life from the Loam. I personally dislike using off-color fetch lands, but they would also be great. The dual lands are Overgrown Tomb, Vernal Fern, Festering Thicket, Underground Mortuary, Temple of Melody, Golgari Rot Farm, Woodland Cemetery, Nurturing Peatland, Underground Stadium, Necroboom Snarl, Tainted Wood, Deathclap Gate, Twilight Mire, Darkborn Pathway, Llanowar Waste, Exotic Orchard, and Command Tower. We have 6 utility lands, including our old friend Dakmor Salvage, Ghost Quarter, Rogue's Passage, Shifting Woodland, Gaia Reach Sanctum, and the best land in the deck, Crypt of Aegeum, which for 2 mana, it generates 1 black mana for each black creature card in our graveyard. Free swamps and free forests round out the mana base. Remember, we want to limit the number of basic lands in this deck to improve Hermit Druid's ability. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video and want to see more deck techs like this in the future, then please leave a like and subscribe.